I sold a $600,000 cabin last week. Actually, that's not true. I almost sold it. I had the real estate agent on the phone, the market assessment printed out, the listing photos scheduled. 34 years I'd spent on that property. 34 summers driving up from Victoria. I'd rebuilt it board by board, rotting sills, collapsed boathouse, a deck that sagged like an old mattress. I'd turned it into something worth loving. And I was about to let it go because my son needed to understand something I should have said out loud 2 years earlier. This is how a man disappears from his own family. And how he fights his way back. I'm 63. Retired contractor. 40 years in the trades, residential work, renovations, additions. I built things that lasted, built them properly. When I retired, I had enough saved to live comfortably. Enough to be useful to the people I loved without making a production of it. My son was 38 when this started. Married 6 years. 2 kids, a girl, 7, and a boy, 5. I adored those 2 in a way that surprised me. I'm not the type to get emotional over crayon drawings or long explanations about why certain rocks are more interesting than other rocks. But those 2 unlocked something in me. And I wasn't embarrassed about it. My daughter-in-law had a brother. I'll call him Brian. Because that's his name. Brian was 36. Lived in Vancouver. Worked in finance. He was the kind of man who filled a room the moment he walked into it, not through warmth, but through sheer insistence on his own presence. He had opinions about everything. Where to eat. Which route to take. How the children should be raised. What time dinner should be served. He delivered these opinions the way some people deliver verdicts. And my daughter-in-law, for reasons I spent a long time trying to understand, deferred to him almost completely. The first time I noticed the pattern, I told myself I was being oversensitive. Spring, 2 years ago. I'd planned to take my grandchildren to Butchart Gardens. Tulip season. My granddaughter had been asking about it for weeks. I had it on the calendar. Confirmed it with my son. Even bought tickets in advance because that's the sort of thing I did. The day before, my daughter-in-law texted. "Hi, Brian's in town this weekend unexpectedly. He wants to take the kids to Science World in Vancouver. We're catching the morning ferry. Sorry about Butchart. Can we reschedule?" I stared at that message for a while. Then I wrote back, "Of course. Have a wonderful trip." I went to Butchart Gardens alone. The tulips were extraordinary. I took photographs to show my granddaughter later. I told myself it was a one-time thing. A scheduling conflict. Nothing more. Canada Day. I'd invited them all to the cabin at Shawnigan Lake. The whole point of the cabin was exactly this: summer holidays with family, barbecues on the dock, the children learning to canoe. My son had confirmed they were coming. I bought food for a week. Brian called the night before with a better idea. A friend had a boat in Nanaimo. Wouldn't the kids love a day on the ocean? My son texted, "Brian's organized something with his buddy. Sounds amazing for the kids. Rain check on the cabin." I grilled a hamburger by myself and watched the lake go dark. My daughter called from Toronto a week later. She's always been more perceptive than I give her credit for. "How was Canada Day?" "Quiet," I said. "Quiet how?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Has that happened before? And that's when I really thought about it. The way you think about a structural problem when you're assessing a foundation, going back to the beginning, looking for the point where things started shifting. Thanksgiving the year before. Brian restructured the whole day, insisted they eat at a restaurant downtown instead of cooking at my son's house the way we always had. I sat across from him at a table I hadn't chosen, watching him order wine without asking what anyone else wanted. I told myself, this is fine. This is one dinner. My grandson's 5th birthday. I'd offered to host at the cabin. Brian suggested an indoor play center in Langford would be more fun for the kids. I showed up to a rented party room with 15 other parents I'd never met. Spent 2 hours in a plastic chair eating grocery store sheet cake while my grandson ran around a foam pit. My son's 40th birthday. I'd booked a table at a small Italian place on Fort Street, somewhere my son loved, had mentioned wanting to go back to. Brian decided the 40th deserved something bigger. Organized a group dinner at a steakhouse in Vancouver. My son flew over for it. I wasn't invited. Not explicitly uninvited, nobody called to say, don't come. But nobody called to say, do come either. I found out it had happened when I saw photographs on my daughter-in-law's social media 3 days later. I listed all of this for my daughter over the phone. Hearing it out loud was different from holding it silently. It sounded worse. How long has this been going on? She asked. Long enough that I stopped tracking it. You need to say something to him. Which him? Both of them, she said. But start with your son. I didn't. Not right away. I'm not a man who confronts things quickly. I spent 40 years in the trades, which teaches you patience. You wait for the right moment. You prepare. You don't start swinging a hammer until you know exactly where the nail needs to go. So I waited. And I watched. And I kept notes in a small book by my armchair, writing down dates and details the way I used to write down materials lists on job sites. Summer came. My son brought the family to the cabin for a long weekend in July. 3 days on the water. The children learning to paddle. Evening card games on the porch. My son and I worked on a repair to the boathouse roof together the first morning. It was good. It was easy. It was the thing I'd been missing. Brian arrived on the second afternoon. Nobody had mentioned he was coming. Thought I'd surprise everyone, he said. Drove up from the Horseshoe Bay Ferry on a whim. He walked in, took over the barbecue without asking, rearranged the seating on the porch so he had the chair with the best view of the lake, and spent the evening directing conversation the way a traffic officer directs cars. I sat at the far end of the porch and watched my son laugh at Brian's stories. And I thought, this is who you've become. That night, after the children were in bed, I sat with my son on the dock. I was looking forward to this weekend being just family, I said quietly. Brian's family, my son said. He's your wife's brother. He's not your father. My son looked at me. Then he looked at the water. Come on, Dad. Don't be like that. Like what? Honest? He was just passing through. He wasn't passing through. He drove 2 hours up from Horseshoe Bay on a Friday afternoon. That's not passing through. That's choosing to be here over being somewhere else. My son rubbed the back of his neck. He means well. That's not the point. He didn't ask what the point was. That bothered me more than anything he could have said. September brought the incident that changed everything. My granddaughter's school had a grandparents' day. A Friday morning classroom visit. A little presentation the children had prepared. Lunch in the gymnasium. My granddaughter had mentioned it to me 3 Sundays in a row, each time with a specific kind of 7-year-old emphasis that meant she very badly wanted me to be there. I'd cleared my calendar. I'd even ironed a shirt. Brian flew into Victoria on Thursday. By Friday morning, he'd decided to take both kids out of school for the day to go whale watching out of Sydney. An educational experience, he called it. According to the text my daughter-in-law sent me at 7:45 a.m., 20 minutes before I was supposed to leave for the school. So sorry, Brian surprised the kids with a whale-watching trip this morning. They're so excited. Grandparents' Day will happen again next year for sure. I sat at my kitchen table with my ironed shirt on and read that message 4 times. Then I called my daughter. The Grandparents' Day, I said. The one she's been talking about for a month. Yes. My daughter said some things I won't repeat. Then she said, "Dad, you have to do something." I took a week. I thought carefully about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. The same way I used to think through complex structural problems on job sites. What was I actually asking for? What outcome was I working toward? What leverage did I have? That last question was more useful than it might sound. I'd paid for the cabin myself. I'd built it myself. It was in my name, free and clear. And for the past several years, the cabin had been as much my son's family's summer retreat as it was mine. Which had always been the intention. Which I'd always been glad about. But intentions, I was learning, can be mistaken for entitlements. I called a real estate agent. "We can have it listed by Monday," she said. Her voice was calm and professional. "At current Shawnigan Lake prices, you're looking at somewhere between $585,000 and $620,000. It's a beautiful property. Give me a formal market assessment," I said. "I'll let you know." She sent it by email 2 days later. I printed it. Folded it twice. Put it in my jacket pocket. Then I invited my son to lunch. We met at a diner in Victoria we'd gone to for years. He showed up looking slightly puzzled, the way he always looked when he suspected something was coming. I let him order. I let him talk about work for a few minutes. Then I said, "I need to talk to you about the cabin." He set down his coffee. "The cabin? I've been thinking about what to do with it." "What do you mean, what to do with it?" "The upkeep is getting expensive," I said. Which wasn't entirely untrue. And I've been thinking about whether it makes sense to hold on to it at this point in my life. "Dad, you love that cabin." "I do," I said. "I've spent 34 years on it. I built that boathouse the summer after your mother died. I know every board in that place by feel." I paused. "I also know that for the last 2 years, I've been made to feel like a guest in my own family." He started to speak. I held up a hand. "Let me finish. I'm not raising my voice. I'm not making accusations. I'm telling you something I should have said a long time ago. And I'm asking you to listen the way I taught you to listen when someone is trying to tell you something important." He nodded. "Your brother-in-law has attended or disrupted almost every family event in the past 2 years. The Butchart Gardens trip I planned for the children. Canada Day at the cabin. Your 40th birthday, which I found out about from photographs online. The boathouse weekend in July. And last Friday, your daughter's grandparents' day at school. Which she'd been asking me about for a month." My son looked at the table. "I'm not asking you to choose between your wife and your father," I said. "I'm asking you to notice what has been happening. And to tell me honestly whether you think it's acceptable." He was quiet for a long time. "Brian doesn't mean to push you out." "I know he doesn't," I said. "But that's the result. And the question isn't what Brian intends. The question is what you're going to do about it. What do you want me to do? He's her brother. She loves him. I know she does. And I've never asked anyone to love him less. I'm asking you to stop letting him determine when and how I can be part of my grandchildren's lives." I let that sit for a moment. "Do you know what your daughter said to me last Sunday?" He looked up. "She asked me why I never come to things anymore. Those were her exact words. 'Why don't you come to things anymore, Grandpa?' I kept my voice even. I told her I'd been busy. She said she'd made me something and she was waiting to give it to me. She's been waiting to give it to me for 3 weeks. Because she hasn't seen me." My son looked like he'd been hit with something. "I love those children," I said. "And I believe when they grow up, they'll wonder why their grandfather wasn't around more. I don't want that. I don't think you want that either." He stared at his coffee cup. "What does the cabin have to do with any of this?" "I'm getting there. I slid the market assessment across the table. The cabin is worth somewhere between $585,000 and $620,000. I've spoken to a real estate agent. His face changed completely. You're not serious. I haven't listed it yet. But I want you to understand that I'm considering it. Because if I'm going to be treated as optional in this family, I need to make decisions that reflect that reality. The cabin makes sense to keep if I have a family that uses it together. It makes less sense if it's just me alone most weekends, wondering when I'll next be allowed to see my grandchildren without Brian materializing to redirect the day. Aloud. He repeated the word like it tasted wrong. Yes, I said. That's what it feels like. He pushed back from the table slightly. This feels like a threat, Dad. It's not a threat. It's an honest account of where I am. I leaned forward. What I actually want is to be treated like family. To know that when I make plans with my grandchildren, those plans will be kept unless there's a genuine emergency. To stop finding out about events in my own son's life through photographs on the internet. I stood up. That's a list of dates over the past 2 years. I want you to read it. I paid for lunch. Left him sitting there with the paper in front of him. And drove home. My phone started ringing that evening. First my son. Then my daughter-in-law, which surprised me. She rarely called me directly. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be Brian. Which surprised me considerably. I didn't answer any of them. I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea and watched the light go off the Sook Hills. And I let the calls go to voicemail. My daughter called at 9 o'clock. Your brother says you threatened to sell the cabin. I said I was considering it. He's very upset. I know. He feels like you're holding the cabin hostage to manipulate the family. I thought about that carefully. Your brother has had a birthday party, a holiday weekend, a grandparents' day, and a 40th birthday dinner taken from him over the past 2 years by someone who showed up uninvited and redirected things to suit himself. He has spent at least a dozen Sundays alone because visits that were planned got cancelled when Brian came to town. Has Brian spent any comparable amount of time wondering whether your brother feels manipulated? My daughter was quiet. I'm not holding anything hostage, I said. I'm making decisions about my own property based on my own circumstances. That's not manipulation. That's agency. Dad, what do you actually want to happen? I want my son to be my son. I want to take my granddaughter to Butchart Gardens. I want to eat dinner with my family on Canada Day without Brian showing up to reroute everything. I want my grandson to show me his rocks and his sticks and his complicated outdoor games. And I want to be paying attention to him when he does it, not sitting in the corner feeling like an obligation. She was quiet for a long moment. Are you really going to sell the cabin? I'd asked myself that question 100 times. I'd stood on the dock the previous Sunday and looked at the boathouse I'd built in the worst year of my life, the year I'd needed something to do with my hands. And I'd felt something close to grief at the thought of letting it go. If nothing changes, I said, yes. 3 days passed. Then my daughter-in-law called again. And this time I answered. Can I come over? Yes. She arrived at my house in the late afternoon. Without my son. Without the children. She sat at my kitchen table looking like someone who'd been preparing what they wanted to say for 72 hours and still wasn't entirely sure they had it right. I owe you an apology, she said. I waited. I know Brian is difficult. I know he takes up a lot of space. She looked at her hands. Growing up, he was the one who made the decisions, organized the plans. And I've been managing him my whole life. I know how to keep him happy. And I know how much easier everything is when he's happy. And I think I've been doing that at your expense. Without really letting myself see it. Why didn't you see it? I asked. Not unkindly. I genuinely wanted to understand. She thought about it. Because you never said anything. You were always so easy about everything. If I cancelled something, you said, of course, it's fine. If Brian showed up, you'd move over and make room. You never made it hard. I was trying not to cause problems. I know. But it meant I could keep not looking at it. She met my eyes. The Grandparents' Day. When I found out your granddaughter had been waiting to give you that card for 3 weeks, she'd drawn a picture of the two of you at the cabin. She put it in her backpack every day thinking she'd see you. She stopped. That got through to me. In a way that nothing else had. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice. I talked to Brian, she said. I told him he can't keep showing up and redirecting the family's plans. I told him that if he wants to be part of things, he needs to be invited. And he needs to fit in around what's already arranged. Not the other way around. She paused. He didn't take it well initially. I imagine not. But he came around. He knows he has a tendency to take over. He doesn't mean to be unkind. He fills space. And nobody ever told him that was a problem. She looked at me. I should have told him years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. My son called that Sunday. Not to cancel. Not to rearrange. Just to talk. The way we used to talk about small things. His job. A repair I'd mentioned doing on the cabin dock. A book I was reading. It lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, he said, I miss talking to you. I've been here the whole time, I said. I know, he said. That's the part one got wrong. He came over the following Thursday evening. With the children. Without Brian. My granddaughter came through the front door at a run and handed me a piece of paper folded in quarters. Drawn on with felt markers in 7 colors. It was the two of us at the cabin. Identifiable mainly by the blue horizontal stripe at the bottom, which I understood to be the lake, and the brown vertical rectangle I understood to be me. We were both smiling. We were the same height. Because at 7, she hadn't yet grasped relative scale. I made it 3 weeks ago, she told me seriously. I kept it in my bag. It's the best thing anyone's given me in a long time, I said. And I meant it completely. My grandson spent 40 minutes showing me a classification system he'd invented for different types of gravel in the backyard. I listened to every word. Asked questions that were, I think, reasonably intelligent. And he was satisfied with me as an audience. My son and I sat on the back porch after the children went inside. The cabin, he said. What about it? Are you going to sell it? I've been thinking about that question every day for 3 weeks. I looked at my garden. At the apple tree I'd planted when my son was born. At the fence I'd rebuilt 2 summers ago when the old cedar finally gave up. I thought about the boathouse at Shawnigan Lake. About the smell of the water in the morning when the mist was still on it. About my grandson's face the first time I'd let him hold the other end of a paddle. Not right now, I said. Things need to change first. And then I'll see. What does change look like? It looks like Sundays. Regular, predictable Sundays where I know I'm going to see those kids. And that plan doesn't get quietly moved aside because someone else had a different idea. It looks like my son's birthday being a thing I find out about in advance, not in photographs after the fact. It looks like my granddaughter not carrying a card around in her backpack for 3 weeks because she's waiting to see me. He nodded. It also looks like you having a direct conversation with Brian. About expectations when he visits. Not me doing it. Not your wife doing it alone. You. Because you're his brother-in-law. And because you're the one who let things go sideways. I know. I don't need him to become someone else, I said. I just need him to understand that he walks into a situation that already has a structure. And he fits into that structure. rather than replacing it. I talked to him, my son said. Last week. It was uncomfortable. Good conversations often are. He almost smiled. He said he didn't realize. He actually said that he genuinely hadn't noticed how much space he was taking up. I believe him, I said. That's almost more frustrating than if he'd done it deliberately. My son looked at me sideways. You're not going to make this easy, are you? I wasn't the one who made it hard, I said. I'm just the one who finally said so. The following 6 months were imperfect. In the particular way that real things are imperfect. Not a movie reconciliation. Not a clean before and after. But a slow, effortful renegotiation of how we all occupied the same life. Christmas was the real test. Brian flew in from Vancouver on the 23rd, as he usually did. In previous years, that had meant Christmas morning belonged to him. Presents, breakfast, the whole production. And I'd received a dinner invitation for the 27th, after he'd flown back. This year was different. My son called me in early December to ask what time worked for me on Christmas morning. What time worked for me? I told him I'd be there at 9 o'clock. He said they'd have coffee ready. Brian was there when I arrived. That surprised me slightly. I'd half expected the arrangement to quietly collapse under his presence. But my daughter-in-law had clearly managed things. Because there was a chair, metaphorically speaking, at the head of the living room where the children were already attacking their stockings. Brian sat on the sofa and made room. And to his credit, he did not attempt to direct the proceedings. He complimented a sweater I was wearing. Which I thought was a reasonable effort. My grandchildren opened presents with the uncontained physical joy specific to children on Christmas morning. My grandson got a set of geology tools, a small hammer, a loop, a field guide, and turned to me immediately to show me the loop. Because I'd told him in October that geologists used them to look at mineral grains. My granddaughter got a sketchbook and a set of professional felt markers. And made a drawing of the whole room within 20 minutes. People included. Everyone identifiable. All of us the same height. I drove home that afternoon feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Which was simply that things were right. I'm sitting on the cabin dock right now. It's a late June evening. The lake is flat and gold. My grandson is explaining to me, for the second time this afternoon, why granite is superior to basalt as a material for toolmaking. I am paying close attention. My granddaughter is on the boathouse deck with her sketchbook, drawing the mountains. Every few minutes she calls over to tell me something she's noticed about the way the light sits on the water. My son is fixing dinner inside. He asked me this afternoon if I wanted to stay the week. I said I'd stay 3 days and we'd see. He laughed. You're never going to make anything easy, are you? I make plenty of things easy, I said. I just stop making the wrong things easy. That's the thing about spending 40 years building structures that are meant to last. You develop a sense, eventually, for which compromises are acceptable. And which ones, made silently and repeatedly over time, will compromise the whole. I let too many of those go too long. I told myself I was being patient. Being adaptable. Being the kind of father and grandfather who didn't make waves. What I was actually being was invisible. I'm not invisible now. I take up the space I'm entitled to. I show up when I say I will. I say clearly when something isn't working, before it has 2 years to accumulate into a crisis. And I keep the cabin. Because the cabin is mine. Because I built it. And because every summer from now on, I intend to be sitting on this dock watching my grandchildren grow up exactly as I always planned. My grandson has moved on from granite. He's now explaining with some urgency that the flat rock at the end of the dock is almost certainly a piece of metamorphic schist. And maybe, in his estimation, quite old. How old? I ask. He thinks about it with great seriousness. At least 1 million, he says finally. I nod. That's old. Older than you, he says helpfully. Everything is older than me, I say. He finds this very funny. He laughs the way children laugh, from the whole body. And the sound goes out across the flat gold water and comes back as an echo. Faint, but clear. I could not have built anything better than this.